Hi, Sonia here from the Art of Stamping with a new card making tutorial. Again, I'm here to introduce you to a beautiful new stamp from the new Garden Blooms collection by Purple Onion Designs. It's called Bushes, and as with the umbrella stamp I shared in the last video, it's basically intended to be an accessory stamp that goes with the cute critters Stacy Yakula illustrated for the new collection. However, I'm using it as a focal image here, and I think it's great to use it as such as well, because of the little details in the trees, which I think get a bit lost if you use it as a background stamp only. Let's start with a look at my supplies. First, of course, I'm using the Bushes stamp. And for my sentiment, I'm using an older Thinking of You stamp, which is also by Purple Onion Designs. The paper I'm using is relatively new to me. It's called Paint en Naturel, and it's by Claire Fontaine. It's a craft-colored mixed media paper, and the first tone paper suitable for watercolor techniques I came in touch with. I only used it once before on another card, and I was really impressed how it behaved with distressings. For today's card, I'm using Inktense pencils, and I'm really curious to find out how this paper is going to behave with these. Now, as I'll be watercoloring, I'm of course using a waterproof ink, which is a Calvel Jet Black. And I'm die cutting my main panel with the largest, I think it was, from my favorite things is Stitched Mini Scallop Rectangle dies. I also plan to use a really pretty floral pattern paper by my mind's eye at first, but later on I decided against it because I found it distracted too much from my focal image. And last but certainly not least, I'm using Inktense pencils to color in my focal image. I'm using 6 different shades of green, and I'm really sorry that I didn't note down the exact colors I worked with. I know that a lot of you are interested in facts like these, but I must admit that I'm not the kind of crafter who diligently takes notes of all her supplies. And actually, I think it's not even necessary to know the exact colors to recreate this card or a card in this style. Just make sure you're using different shades of green, warmer yellowish ones as well as colder bluish ones, and you're ready to go. Well, here I'm already stamping the Bushes image onto the pre-cut panel. I'm using my usual placement technique for rubber stamps with my MISTI, which I already explained in another video. For all of you who haven't seen this video and want to find out more about it, I'm going to link it up. Once the stamping is done, I can start coloring. I'm speeding up this process right away because basically it's a really easy coloring technique that doesn't need a lot of explanation. As the Inktense pigments become very intense when being diluted with water, which is one reason for their name, I'm starting by laying down my color very lightly at first. I've decided I wanted my light source to come from the top right corner, that's why I'm laying down some more color in the bottom left corner of all the bushes right away, so that I already get some shading done there. After I applied my first layer of pigments, I start to dilute them with water. I'm using a fine tip round brush for this, it's a number 3 brush I think, and to keep the shading intact I work my way from the lightest area down to the darkest. That way I avoid to accidentally transfer too much color into the highlight areas, which would destroy all of the shading I've done before. When my first layer of color has dried, I can go in and add another one to deepen my shadows and intensify my shading. This is especially easy when using Inktense pencils because their pigments become permanent when dry, which means that they won't dissolve anymore when they get into contact with water again, as other watercolors usually would. the second layer of color has dried, I'm basically satisfied with the shading. I only go in again here and there with some of my darkest shades to deepen the shadows in spots that I think could use a little bit more detail. But I won't dilute these pigments anymore. That's another thing I love about the Inktense pencils, that you can use them dry, like colored pencils as well. Now, to finish off my coloring and highlight the whimsical details of the bushes, I'm tracing most of the dots and lines with a white gel pen. And with that, my coloring is done. To me, the vibrancy of the colors on the toned paper is absolutely amazing, just as it had been with the distress inks before. And I can't wait to test the Clairefontaine paper with even more water-soluble media. Here you see me holding the finished coloring against the pattern paper I intended to use initially. And you might agree that it's not only a much too busy background for my panel, but also the colors don't really match, so that at this point I decided not to use it. Instead, I opted for a hand-stamped background and some inlaid die cutting. I die cut a stitched rectangle from cream-colored cardstock and stamped the border with the potted plants, which are also part of the new release by Purple Onion Designs. I used the lightest ink color for it that I had on hand, which is Simon Says Stamp's Fog, a very, very light grey, because I only wanted to create some movement and very light pattern on my frame that doesn't distract from the focal image. Once finished, I grabbed the scallop frame again, which I used for my panel, and die cut it from the center of the stitched rectangle so that I then could fit the panel into the resulting gap. To make both elements stick together, I glued them onto ordinary thin printing paper. Now all I had to do was stamp the greeting and mount everything onto a card base. I white embossed my greeting onto a scrap stripe of black cardstock and opted for a craft colored card base to match my main panel. To glue a panel onto a card base, I usually use ordinary tape runner or foam tape. For this card, I didn't want to go with the dimension you get when using foam tape, but I also didn't want to use tape runner, as the back of my panel was not completely flat because of the printing paper which held the panel and its frame together. That's why I'm using stronger double-sided tape here. It's actually carpet tape from the hardware store. As far as I know, it's acid-free and safe to use with paper too. I also use it to glue thick and slightly wavy watercolor panels onto card bases, for which it's absolutely ideal. And to this day, I've always been satisfied with the outcome. To glue down the greeting, I'm using foam tape. After having fixed it onto the card, I'm cutting off the excess from behind with my scissors. And that's all for my card today. Thanks again for watching. As always, should you have any questions or remarks, just leave me a comment on my blog or in the YouTube section below. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked the video. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of my card making stuff. Have a nice day. Bye.